The lawnmower's bogging down and the grass is looking pretty beat up, so it's time to sharpen that lawnmower blade. Should you just use a bench grinder or a hand file, or is there a better option? Well, let's find out. In the first test, we'll see which sharpening system sharpens dull blades the fastest. Then we'll see which one offers the most accurate blade edge closest to 30 degrees. Finally, we'll see which sharpeners work with mulching blades. So why bother with an expensive sharpening tool when you could just use a file for around $8? I'll be using a 10-inch file that has coarse teeth for rapid stock removal. The file is double cut on both sides. The Mercer file did not come with a handle, so I went ahead and purchased one. The Mercer industry file is made in India. For the first test, I bought 4 new blades. The factory ground edge has some pretty deep grooves and it just isn't very sharp. The ideal angle for sharpening a lawnmower blade is 30 degrees. And the angle of the new blade is 27.6 degrees. So let's see how long it takes to clean up the blades with each sharpening system. I'll push the file up the blade to sharpen it, and I'll lift it on the return. I made 150 passes across the blade with the file in 2.5 minutes. Results are likely to vary quite a bit when freehanding, but the blade edge is now pretty close to 29.6 degrees. If you own a drill, why not just use this Arnold Blade Sharpening and Balancing Kit for around $13? It says right on the packaging, it gives you a sharp edge in minutes, maximizes cutting performance. Designed for mower, tractor, and zero-turn riding mower blades. The Arnold kit is made in China. Remove blade from mower or tractor and place in vise with cutting edge up. Place blade sharpener in any electric drill. Place the blade sharpener over the blade edge with the grinding wheel against the beveled edge and the nylon guide against the flat underside. Using the forward face of the blade sharpener, grind off all nicks and burrs from the flat underside of the blade edge first. Move the blade sharpener lengthwise along the edge, keeping a slight downward pressure. The nylon guide should always be kept flush against the flat underside of the blade. The drill is on the highest speed setting, and I spent 3.5 minutes or a minute longer than the hand file cleaning up and reshaping the edge of the blade. And the blade still has some grooves, but the blade edge is now sharp. And I just didn't do a very good job of forming a correct blade angle, 32.5 degrees. If you have a bench grinder, why not just purchase a sharpening jig like this one, which is made by Tay Tools for $47. Works with any 6 or 8-inch bench grinder. If you need to, you can quickly remove the base to get it out of the way. It also comes with a tool holder. The entire tool rest can be moved forward and backwards 3 inches and raised and lowered 2 inches. It can also be rotated forward and back 170 degrees. The Tay Tool sharpening jig is made in Taiwan. I'm using an 8-inch bench grinder. I have the sharpening jig set up with the flat edge facing inward. I've sharpened quite a few lawnmower blades using just the bench grinder without the sharpening jig. And the sharpening jig has really helped me form a consistent sharpening angle, but it does take a little practice. And the bench grinder sharpening jig combination is more than twice as fast as the hand file and the drill attachment at only 53 seconds. 23.5 degrees, so I'll have to adjust the sharpening angle just a little before the next test. At a price of $159 is this yellow Hornet Mower Blade Sharpener. The jig does not come with an angle grinder, so you will have to purchase an angle grinder if you don't already have one. Constructed of 1/4-inch plate steel and all joints are welded. The yellow Hornet also comes with a blade balancer. The yellow Hornet is made in USA. The blade rest is welded in place and cannot be moved towards or away from the angle grinder. 2 of the 3 angle grinders I attempted to use were just too large for setting the proper blade angle. Fortunately, the very affordable Warrior angle grinder is a great fit. I tightened the hose clamp just enough to allow me to make adjustments to the position of the grinder. Position the grinding disc approximately 1/2 to 3/4 inch above the blade rest. Have approximately 1/4 inch less gap at the rear than the front of the grinding disc. Position the blade firmly on the blade rest and align the cutting edge with the grinding wheel. Lower the blade and pull towards you when sharpening. And I applied a little too much force when sharpening the blade, and the blade was pulled into the sharpener. A flat disc on a grinder works very quickly, and light passes is all it takes. And the yellow Hornet is finished in very close to 20 seconds, or more than twice as fast as the bench grinder. 29.6 degrees is very good and close enough to 30. At a price of $285 is this AllAmerican sharpener model 5005 Generation 2. Includes 4 adapter pins to attach to most grinders to the sharpener assembly. The model 5005 goes from 15 to 45 degrees. I previously tested a different version of the AllAmerican sharpener that was not designed to change the sharpening angle. The AllAmerican is made in USA. You can mount it vertically with just bolts, or you can mount it horizontally. The AllAmerican does not come with the grinder. A 36 or 60 grit flapper wheel is recommended. You can use a hard disc, but it's very easy to gouge the blade. Open the jaws wide enough to accept your blade by unscrewing the handle. The blade should be held in place by 4 clamping pins in the center of the blade. The blade should be straight and square as possible with the edge of the grounding face up towards the top. With the blade clamped into the vise, slide the pivot pin into the pivot bushing. The guide arm should be along the side of the grinder, not out in front. And the center of the cutting wheel should align with the middle of the blade edge. Holding the grinder body in your right hand, grasp the grinder handle with your left. Turn on the grinder and take light, consistent cuts from front to back using a pushing motion. Apply a slight amount of pressure to the holding pin to keep it against the pivot bushing as you grind. And the AllAmerican is by far the fastest sharpener yet at only 8 seconds. And the AllAmerican did a terrific job of removing the grooves and sharpening the blade edge. 29.3 degrees is very good and close enough to 30. And the most expensive sharpening system we'll be testing at a price of almost $1,200 is this RGB 950. It's even designed to sharpen mulching blades. It claims to be fast and easy with preset blade guides. It has a 3/4 horsepower continuous duty motor. It includes 9-inch fast grind wheel and a 7-inch flap wheel. The RGB 950 is made in USA. Once the grinder is powered up, lower the blade so that the edge nearest to the center hole contacts the grinding wheel first. Pull the blade back until you reach the outer edge. Periodically check the cutting edge while grinding until the blade is fully sharpened. Once the blade has been properly sharpened, there should be a small burr that's formed on the opposite side of the blade. And I could have made a lot faster progress with the RGB 950, but there is a learning curve with all the sharpeners. And the sharpener is finished in about 17 seconds and the blade edge looks very nice. 29.2 degrees is very close to the same as the Yellow Hornet and the AllAmerican. If you're looking for a sharpener that's quick and efficient, the AllAmerican is the fastest at putting a nice edge on a new blade in only 8 seconds. The RGB 950 is also very quick at 17 seconds and the Yellow Hornet 20 seconds. So I was able to sharpen 4 of the 6 blades within 1 degree of the target 30-degree goal. Let's go ahead and dull the blades that were just sharpened. I'll grind the edge of the blade flat and we'll also add some dings to simulate rock chips. And the blade now looks very dull and pretty beat up with all the damage to the blade edge. So we can see the progress, I'll go ahead and spray paint the blade edge. The paint is dry and the blade is now starting out at 802 grams. So let's see how long it takes to sharpen this blade using a hand file. Before I start the timer, I'll go ahead and file away the burr and the chips on the bottom side of the blade. The hand file is actually doing a really good job of making a nice flat edge. However, compared to the other sharpening methods, the hand file definitely takes a lot more effort. Many riding lawnmowers have 3 blades, so this process would have to be repeated 6 times. And it took me close to 7 minutes to sharpen the blade edge, and the blade edge does look pretty nice and consistent. The file left behind quite a few metal filings. And the blade edge angle is off by a little bit at 32.2 degrees. The blade started off at 802 grams and it now weighs 798, a loss of 4 grams. The Arnold Drill Attachment blade is starting off at 803 grams. I'll go ahead and remove the damage from the bottom side of the blade to avoid causing damage to the plastic part of the sharpener. Sharpening the blade with the Arnold Drill Attachment is a very slow process. The grinding stone has a very small diameter and the sharpener just isn't designed for too much force. The hand file definitely seems like a faster sharpening process. And I'm finished sharpening the blade and it's taken me 9 minutes or 2 minutes longer than the hand file. The blade edge looks pretty consistent, but not quite as consistent as a hand file. Also, I didn't do a very good job with the blade edge angle at 38.3 degrees. And the blade started out at 803 grams and it's now down 3 grams to 800. And the blade that I'll be using for the bench grinder and jig is starting out at 800 grams. And the bottom side of the blade is cleaned up so the blade should be able to move freely across the sharpener. And the sharpening jig really helps with keeping the angle pretty close, but it does take some practice to avoid the grinding wheel grabbing the blade. However, the bench grinder is making a lot faster progress than the hand file and the drill attachment. And I'm finished sharpening the blade in 3 minutes and 30 seconds. The blade edge is sharp, but the blade angle isn't quite as consistent as the hand file or the drill attachment. 25 degrees is an improvement, but I still need to adjust the angle of the jig. And the blade started off at 800 grams and is down 5 grams to 795. And the blade for the Yellow Hornet is starting off at 801 grams. And the bottom side of the blade is cleaned up so the blade should be able to move freely across the sharpener. And the Yellow Hornet is a lot easier to use than the bench grinder and jig setup. The flat disc also makes a much faster and cleaner cut. Compared to last time, this time I used less force and I didn't have any issues with the Yellow Hornet grabbing the blade. And the blade is already sharp in just over 2 minutes. The blade edge is consistent along the entire edge and is nice and sharp. 29.3 degrees will definitely work very well. And the Yellow Hornet blade started off at 801 grams and is now down 7 grams to 794. And the blade for the AllAmerican is starting out at 800 grams. Of all the sharpening systems, the AllAmerican seems like the easiest to use. 14 passes across the blade edge and the AllAmerican is finished in around 30 seconds. And the blade edge is very sharp and consistent, and as expected, there's a nice burr that's formed on the bottom side of the blade. And the blade edge is just over 30 degrees, which is pretty close to perfect. The AllAmerican started off at 800 grams and is now down 8 grams to 792. And the RGB 950 is starting out at 795 grams. I'll clean up the bottom side of the blade using the flap disc. One pass across the flap disc and the bottom side of the blade is very smooth. I'm applying a lot less force sharpening the blade compared to the AllAmerican. Comparing sharpening speed really isn't fair, but I'm still trying to adjust to using the sharpener. About 1 minute and 15 seconds to sharpen the blade. And the blade edge is very sharp and consistent, and as expected, there's a nice burr that's formed on the bottom side of the blade. Just like the AllAmerican blade, the RGB is down 8 grams to 787. And 30.3 degrees is just about perfect. So once again, the AllAmerican made the quickest work of sharpening the blade in only 30 seconds. However, the RGB was definitely more capable than 1 minute and 15 seconds. The Yellow Hornet is also very fast at 2 minutes. I've offered to sharpen blades for others and have seen some really dull blades, starting off at 682 grams. So let's really put the sharpness to the test, sharpening 3/16 flat iron that does not already have an edge. I'll sharpen 6 inches of metal and will limit the test to just 10 minutes. And this is some really hard steel, but not quite as hard as Marbane steel. And the file is really struggling to create a blade edge. And 10 minutes is up, but I didn't make very much progress with only half of the blade edge formed. 24.4 degrees, but there's a lot more work that needs to be done. The metal now weighs 679 grams, so only 3 grams of metal was removed. A close-up look under the microscope, and the file has already experienced quite a bit of dulling. And the blade for the Arnold wheel is starting off at 870 grams. And the abrasive wheel just isn't designed to sharpen a blade quickly. However, it seems to be making a little bit better progress compared to the hand file. And the Arnold drill attachment made a little bit more progress. About 60% of the thickness of the blade has been formed. Unfortunately, I just didn't do too well at around 38.3 degrees. A total of 4 grams of metal was removed from the blade edge. The blade that I'll be using with the sharpening jig is starting off at 829 grams. And I'm still getting used to the sharpening jig. Too much force and the grinder grabs the blade edge. About 5 minutes and 15 seconds to sharpen the blade. And the blade edge just isn't as consistent as some of the other sharpeners. However, 26 degrees is the closest so far to the target angle of 30 degrees. As expected, there's a small burr that's formed on the underside of the blade. And the bench grinder and sharpening jig ground away 17 grams in 5 minutes and 15 seconds. And the blade for the Yellow Hornet is starting off at 865 grams. And I'm finally getting more proficient at sharpening with the Yellow Hornet. And the Yellow Hornet is making very quick work of creating a blade edge. This is definitely a lot better setup compared to the bench grinder. And the Yellow Hornet is finished in 2 minutes and 45 seconds. The blade edge looks very smooth and consistent and is also nice and sharp. 29.4 degrees is very good and close enough to 30. And the Yellow Hornet ground away 19 grams of metal, or 2 grams more than the bench grinder and sharpening jig. And the blade for the AllAmerican is starting off at 679 grams. Other than the hand file, all the other sharpening systems require holding onto the blade while it's being sharpened. It seems like I have better control holding onto the object doing the sharpening, and I really like being able to see the blade face during the sharpening process. And the AllAmerican is the fastest yet at less than a minute. Very impressive. And the blade edge is very consistent and has a nice and sharp edge. 29.2 degrees is also very good. And the AllAmerican ground away 28 grams of metal. The RGB 950 is starting off at 745 grams. And I'm finally getting used to the RGB 950 and it's making very quick progress. And the RGB 950 is finished in just under 2 minutes. And the flat disc leaves a slightly convex edge, but the RGB 950 makes a perfectly flat ground blade edge. The blade edge also looks the most consistent of all the brands and is nice and sharp. And 30.4 degrees is the best yet. The RGB removed 21 grams of metal. As they say, time is money, and the sharpening system that'll save you the most time is the AllAmerican at sharpening the blended steel in under a minute. The RGB is a little more precise but not quite as fast at just under 2 minutes. When it comes to creating a 30-degree edge, the RGB 950, Yellow Hornet, and AllAmerican were off target by less than 1 degree. Metal removal rate can vary significantly, but the AllAmerican was the fastest for me at 31.1 grams per minute. RGB 950 is also very fast at 11.1 grams per minute. A lot of lawnmowers use a mulching blade, and many of those don't have a flat edge. Using a hand file will definitely work, but it's more of an art than a science, and creating a consistently sharp edge is difficult and time-consuming. And the Arnold Drill Attachment's plastic guard grabs the edge of the blade when trying to work around the contours. However, with a little patience, it is possible to sharpen a mulching blade with the Arnold. With a sharpening jig, the outer 3 inches of the blade could be sharpened, but one will have to freehand sharpening the rest of the blade. Just like the sharpening jig, the Yellow Hornet is designed for a flat blade. The blade angle varies quite a bit with this blade, so I'll have to change the sharpening angle several times. I really like that I can see the blade edge as it's being sharpened. With the RGB, the outer portion of the blade can be sharpened with the grinding wheel on the sharpener. I'll have to use the flap disc and freehand sharpen the rest of the blade edge. And the RGB is very easy to work with sharpening the mulching blade. Since this is a blade sharpening video, balancing a blade really helps reduce vibration. You can find a blade balancer like this one for just a few dollars. When the blade is centered on the balancer, the blade should be level. If the blade isn't level, it's out of balance, and the side that's lower needs material removed. So which sharpening system is the best? I really like 3 of the brands, including the RGB 950, the Yellow Hornet, as well as the AllAmerican. However, the RGB 950 is just way too expensive for most consumers, and it's also pretty large. I really like the AllAmerican quite a bit. It's very compact and it does a terrific job. I like the Yellow Hornet quite a bit, but it would be very nice if the blade rest could be moved forwards and backwards to accommodate more grinders. All the videos in this channel, including this one, are viewer suggested. So if you have a video idea, I hope you'll take time to leave a comment. Thanks so much for watching. Please take care and look forward to next time.